Nancy Drew Mystery Stories, number 47, The Mysterious Mannequin by Carolyn Keene. Copyright 1970, Simon & Schuster. Chapter 1, The Hidden Message. Nancy Drew opened the door of her father's office and walked in. He had phoned her to pick him up since his car was in the repair shop. "Hi," she said to Miss Hanson, his secretary. "Hello, Nancy," the woman replied. "Your father will be ready in a few minutes." She gave a little chuckle and pointed to a package on a chair near the door. "That came a little while ago. Looks mysterious." Nancy's interest was aroused at once. The package was about 18 inches square and well wrapped. She glanced at the airmail stamps and postmark. "This is from Istanbul, Turkey." The attractive teenage detective leaned down to get a look at the sender's name and address. There was none. "That's strange," she thought. Just then, Carson Drew, a tall, good-looking man in his late 40s, appeared from his inner office. He kissed Nancy, then looked at the package. "What's this?" he asked. From Istanbul. I didn't order anything from there. Nancy, have any of our friends been to Turkey recently?" Nancy thought for a moment. "None that I can think of." "Let's open the package. Maybe the sender's name is inside." Miss Hanson took a pair of shears from her desk and cut the sealing tape. Inside the wrapping was a Turkish prayer rug 3 by 5 feet. "How beautiful!" Nancy exclaimed, unfolding it. The center section of the new Oriental silk rug had a pale gold background with a flower design. Its rectangular border was an intricate combination of leaves, vines, and geometric symbols in shades of deep rose, blue, and gold. "It's exquisite," Miss Hanson remarked. "Strange that the sender didn't enclose a card." Mr. Drew continued to stare at the rug. Finally, he said, "I'm going to hazard a guess about who sent this. Miss Hanson, do you recall my Turkish-American client, Farouk Tahmasp?" The secretary nodded. "He owned the Turkish rug shop in town and disappeared mysteriously." "He's the one," the lawyer said. He turned to Nancy. "Farouk's shop was over on Satcher Street, where there's a tailor now. It was a very fine shop, and he sold many expensive Orientals. Farouk was accused by customs officials of having smuggled in several valuable rugs. He denied it and came to me for advice. I took his case, but before it came up in court, Farouk suddenly vanished. He left a note for me saying he could not stand the disgrace, even though he was innocent. He did not say where he was going, and I haven't heard from him since. Too bad, because he does not know that he was acquitted. Someone in Turkey had reported wrong information." "What a shame," said Nancy. Her eyes lighted up. "I remember that shop. Didn't he have a mannequin in the window?" "Yes." Nancy smiled. "It was about 6 years ago that I first saw the mannequin. It was a young Turkish lady. She wore pale blue pantaloons and a long-sleeved cerise blouse. What interested me most was the big white veil that covered her whole head, except her eyes and the upper part of her nose." "That's right," her father agreed. "Women in Turkey were required to wear that type of costume before the country became a republic in 1923. But nowadays, most of them wear Western-style dress." Nancy chuckled. "One time, when I stood looking at the mannequin, I was sure she had winked at me. I kept going back to see if she would do it again, but she never did." Mr. Drew and Miss Hanson laughed. Her father said, "With your imagination, I can see how you might think that. By the way, Farouk Tahmasp disappeared nearly 2 years ago." "And you think maybe he's in Turkey and sent this rug?" Nancy asked. "Did he owe you legal fees?" The lawyer shook his head. "That's one of the strange parts of the story. Farouk sent me money before he left. He greatly overpaid me, and I have always wanted to send him a refund." "What happened to the mannequin?" Nancy queried. Her father said he did not know. "Farouk probably sold her to a shop or museum." Mr. Drew went on to say that according to neighbors, all the rugs in the shop had been loaded on a van and taken away. He said that later he found out a dealer in New York had paid cash for the merchandise. So there was no way of tracing Farouk, Nancy remarked. All this while she had been examining the rug. Since the sender didn't enclose his name, do you suppose there could be a message for you woven into the pattern? I've heard that years ago in Turkey, secret messages were hidden in rugs. Mr. Drew smiled. Nancy, I value your hunches. Let's see if we can find something. They laid the rug across Miss Hanson's desk, and the three began to examine the border carefully. No one spoke as their fingers traced flowers, vines, and geometric symbols. In a few moments, Nancy spotted an object hidden among some leaves. I believe it's a car, she said to herself. She moved a forefinger along the rug and came upon the figures of a man and a little boy. Nancy looked at it steadily for several moments. Then she burst out, "Here's a clue!" She pointed. "See that car? And the man and boy?" "Yes," said Miss Hanson. "Does it mean something?" "I'm sure it does," said Nancy. "My father's name! Carson! Carson!" "Why, that's marvelous!" Miss Hanson exclaimed. "But I can't understand why Farouk Tahmasp didn't write his message in a letter." Nancy suggested that the answer might be found in the rug. "Dad," she said, "I'm sure there's a whole message for you in the border of this rug." "Oh, if we can only figure it out!" Miss Hanson smiled. "You will." The three searchers became so intent on their task that Mr. Drew suggested they lay the rug on the floor in order to study it better. It was not long before Nancy found another clue. "Here's a French word, trouver. It means find." "Find what?" Miss Hanson asked. The three did not discover anything more during the next 5 minutes. "Nancy," said Mr. Drew, "it's time for us to go home." He folded the rug, wrapped it in the paper, and carried it to Nancy's car. When the Drews arrived home, they were met at the door by the housekeeper, Mrs. Hannah Gruen. She was a sweet-looking, motherly person who had helped to rear Nancy since Mrs. Drew's death when her daughter was only 3 years of age. "Nancy," she said, "those blue eyes of yours are sparkling. What has happened?" "Another mystery," Nancy announced. "Come into the living room and we'll show you." The housekeeper was amazed, not only because the identity of the donor was unknown, but also because a message was beginning to unfold itself in the intricate weaving. "Hannah," said Nancy, "try your hand at discovering what we are supposed to find." Mrs. Gruen laid the rug on the living room carpet, got down on her knees, and began a search. Meanwhile, Mr. Drew had gone upstairs to make a phone call, and Nancy went to wash her hands and give Togo, her terrier, his supper. When she returned to the living room, Hannah Gruen was sitting back on her heels. "I think I found something," she said. "Look among these vines here. Do you see a word?" "Offhand, no," Nancy replied. "It's like a vine ladder, isn't it?" "Turn it sideways," Hannah suggested. When she did, Nancy cried out in surprise. Woven in and out of the rungs were several letters. "They spell mannequin!" Mr. Drew walked into the room just in time to hear Nancy's exclamation. "Mannequin? We're to find a mannequin? It must be the one that used to sit in Farouk's shop window." "That's a big order," Nancy remarked. "We haven't the least idea where she went to." Mr. Drew put an arm around his daughter. "Nancy, I am assigning you the job of locating her." "Oh, Dad, what a challenge," she said, hugging him. The young detective wondered where to begin. She hoped there were further directions in the rug to give her a clue. As soon as dinner was over, she sat down in the living room with the rug on her lap. Togo lay beside her. After a while, the whole pattern in the rug border became a blur. She had just decided to rest her eyes for a while when the front doorbell rang. Nancy hastened to the door. "Hi, Ned," she said as a handsome, athletic young man walked in. He was Ned Nickerson, who lived in Mapleton, a town a few miles away from River Heights, and dated Nancy regularly. He was a student at Emerson College, where he played football. but during his summer vacation he was selling life insurance. "Hi, Nancy. Any new mysteries since I last saw you?" "I'm sure you expect me to say no," she replied with a broad grin. "But I'm going to fool you. I ran into one this afternoon. It's in the living room." She led the way inside. "A mystery? That rug?" he queried. "Yes. I'll tell you about it on the way to the airport. We'd better hurry so we won't be late picking up Burt and Dave." Nancy hurried off to tell her father and Hannah that she and Ned were leaving and would bring their friends, Bess and George, back to the house together with their 2 dates. Ned stopped first at Bess Marvin's house. The pretty, slightly plump blonde climbed into the car. A few moments later, they picked up her cousin, George Fane. The slender, dark-haired, athletic-looking girl enjoyed her boy's name, even though many people teased her about it. "I guess you'll have to step on it," George remarked to Ned. "You know how Burt hates to wait." Ned drove directly to the far end of the row of airport buildings where passengers from private planes came in. The young people got out of Ned's car and went into the waiting room. No one was around. "I wonder if the boys will be on time," George said. "You'd think there would be some notice on the bulletin board of incoming flights." Minutes went by. Ned tried to phone the tower to get information, but it did not answer. Restless, the group went outside and paced back and forth, keeping their eyes on the sky. Other private planes came in, but not the one they were looking for. Presently, they saw a pilot walking toward them. Ned asked him if he knew anything about the N-104TR. The pilot frowned. "I just heard it's having trouble with the landing gear. It won't let down, and they're low on fuel." Nancy and her friends gasped. Fearful, Bess cried out, "Oh, they'll crash!" End of chapter 1.